Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Untold History, the place where we delve into the lesser-known, but equally transcendental events of history. Today we take you to one of the most disputed regions of Europe during the 80 Years' War, a conflict that pitted the Spanish Empire against the rebellious Dutch provinces. We focused on a local uprising, small compared to the big battles of the time, but one that reflected a strong desire for freedom and a struggle against oppression. Today we will explore the Eggers Rebellion, a conflict that took place between 1598 and 1601 in the provinces of Flanders and Brabant. To understand the Eggers Rebellion, we must place ourselves in the context of the 80 Years' War, also known as the Dutch War of Independence. This conflict pitted the rebellious provinces of the Netherlands, fighting for their independence, against King Philip II of Spain, who was also sovereign of these lands as part of his vast empire. The conflict was long and devastating, with periods of intense battles followed by truces that barely managed to calm tempers. By the end of the 16th century, the Netherlands was divided. The northern provinces, mostly Protestant, managed to consolidate a certain independence thanks to military and diplomatic successes. However, the southern provinces, such as Flanders and Brabant, remained under the direct control of the Spanish Empire, which fervently defended the Catholic faith and its rule. These regions were key for Spain, not only because of their strategic location in Europe, but also because of their economic wealth. As the conflict dragged on, tensions mounted. The Spanish occupation in Flanders and Brabant was characterized by increasing fiscal pressure and the permanent stationing of troops, which wreaked havoc on the local population. This is where the Eggers Rebellion emerged, a peasant revolt that, although brief, captured the spirit of resistance of the population in the face of oppression. The name Eggers comes from the Dutch verb eggeren, which means to harass or to annoy. The term was applied in a derogatory way to peasants and small landowners who, tired of the tax exactions and brutality of the Spanish troops, took up arms. These were not professional warriors or experienced commanders, but were mostly peasants, artisans, and small landowners who were willing to risk everything to improve their living conditions. Although the rebellion was not led by nobles or influential political leaders, the Eggers represented a type of resistance that went beyond grand military strategies, a local resistance driven by desperation and the need to protect their homes and families. The trigger for the uprising was the intensification of oppressive taxes imposed by the Spanish authorities in an attempt to finance the war. For the popular classes, this was unbearable. At the end of 1598, the tax pressure and harsh living conditions led small groups of peasants to rebel in the provinces of Flanders and Brabant. Tax collectors, who were the most visible face of Spanish oppression, were the first targets. Groups of Eggers began attacking Spanish garrisons, ambushing supply caravans, and raiding collection posts. At first, their actions were sporadic and uncoordinated, but as more people joined the movement, the attacks began to gain in organization. The hunger, poverty, and violence of the occupation had generated a perfect breeding ground for revolt, and many communities saw in the Eggers a hope of freeing themselves from the Spanish yoke. Throughout 1599 and 1600, the attacks became bolder and more frequent. They even began attacking Spanish soldiers and officers, taking advantage of the local terrain and their knowledge of the surroundings to carry out lightning attacks and retreat quickly. Although it was not an army in the traditional sense, they managed to keep the Spanish troops in check for several months. In many villages and towns, symbols of Spanish power were destroyed, and local authorities collaborating with the occupiers were deposed or killed. Gangs of Eggers roamed the rural areas, fomenting chaos and resistance, while in the cities, small groups engaged in sabotage and espionage. However, the Spanish army, well trained and better armed, did not take long to respond. In 1600, the governor of the Spanish Netherlands, Albert of Austria, launched a military campaign to crush the rebellion. Spanish forces undertook a series of operations to capture the movement's leaders and disband the Eggers gangs that were still operating. Garrisons were reinforced and additional detachments were sent to rural areas to quell outbreaks of resistance. The Eggers, though brave, could not match Spanish military power. As the crackdown intensified, many of them were captured and publicly executed as an example to deter future uprisings. In some cases, entire villages were razed to the ground and their inhabitants punished for having supported the revolt. The most prominent leaders of the movement were tortured and beheaded. This harsh repression culminated in 1601, when the last resistance cells were finally eliminated. Although the rebellion was put down and failed to change the immediate course of the war, its impact was significant. First, it showed that Spanish control over the southern Netherlands was fragile. Maintaining the occupation was increasingly costly, both economically and militarily, and local discontent could not be completely suppressed. Popular resistance, though poorly armed and without a formal structure, showed that even peasants could challenge the most powerful empire of the time. Second, the rebellion contributed to the erosion of Spanish power in the region. Although the southern provinces remained under Spanish control for several more decades, the war continued to deplete the empire's resources. In the long run, efforts to maintain control of the Netherlands would become untenable, and in 1648, the Peace of Westphalia would end the 80 Years' War, recognizing the independence of the United Provinces of the North. Eventually, the Eggers Rebellion became a symbol of local resistance. Although not as well known as other major battles of the war, the rebellion reflects the spirit of resistance that existed throughout the region. Popular movements were part of a wider mosaic of struggles for independence that, although often forgotten, were central to shaping the history of the Netherlands. This event is a fascinating chapter in the history of the Netherlands, reminding us that history is not only written on the battlefields or in the courts of kings, but also in the efforts and sacrifices of ordinary people. These peasants and small landowners, who revolted against tax oppression and military brutality, are a reminder that the struggle for freedom often arises from the humblest people and in the most desperate moments. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the Eggers Rebellion. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe and activate the bell to receive more stories of Untold Story. See you in the next installment, where we'll explore another little-known event that had a huge impact on the course of history. Until next time.